The smell of desperation from the games industry. I mean, talk about one of the lamest attempts at discrediting the Stop Killing Games movement, which, for those who don't know, is essentially an initiative that is trying to make it so legislators take the issue of video games being wiped out from existence and being removed from players' libraries seriously. And there's a movement that just about, most sensible people agree with. And so you've got a situation where this movement has garnered over 1.4 million signatures, in large part because Pirate Software, a content creator who went against Stop Killing Games and used arguments that misrepresented what the movement was all about, sort of became this common enemy. And that garnered so much attention that Stop Killing Games ultimately ended up meeting its goal, sort of towards the end of its, lifespan. There is a deadline for this initiative to go through, and it went through sort of towards the end when people rallied against Pirate Software and towards Stop Killing Games. Many people thought the movement was dead. It kind of plateaued a little bit, and then Pirate Software became the common enemy that allowed this movement to really shoot past its goal, which is what we want, because some of these signatures could be fake in the hundreds of thousands, but at 1.4 million signatures, it's guaranteed that the European Citizens Initiative will go through, which means that legislators in the European Union will take a look at this and hopefully will pass legislations appropriate to what people are asking, which is not unreasonable. Basically, video games are products. When you buy a product, you should be able to keep it, and those products shouldn't be under the control of companies who are able to wipe them out, not only from existence, which, harms preservation, but also just harms the very notion of just commerce, where when you buy something, nobody else should be able to decide what you do with that product. And you know that a movement is working when companies or groups lobbying companies come out with lame statements that attempt to discredit a movement with bad faith argument, like this statement from Video Game Zero published on July 4th, 2025, which misrepresents Stop Killing Games as a movement that's trying to make it so companies have to support live services forever, which is not at all what Stop Killing Games is asking for. It's asking for games to remain on some level in a functional, playable state. It's not asking for companies to continuously update or balance games, just make sure it exists on some level and players can access it, be it through an offline mode or through, some kind of private servers means. Single player games in particular have no excuse to have any sort of online requirement or download requirement. They try to claim that allowing players to access online games through private servers means that they might be legally liable for, illicit activity that happens on the part of players, when you can put in your EULA that after a game is discontinued, you're no longer responsible for that stuff. It's no longer under your purview. And then they try to claim that Stop Killing Games, if it goes through, will curtail developer choice and make video games prohibitively expensive to create, when that is plain and simply not true. If you build a game with the idea of an end-of-life plan in mind, then it doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive. And then beyond that, Ubisoft itself recently got confronted during an investors meeting with questions about Stop Killing Games and how they plan to address it. And Yves Guillemot, the CEO of Ubisoft, basically responded with something similar. Again, misrepresenting Stop Killing Games, talking about how they can't support a game forever, which is not what Stop Killing Games is asking of companies. They bring up The Crew and how, hey, even though that game got shut down and removed from players' libraries, they did release a sequel, and at one point it went on sale back in September of 2024 for $1 or €1. But that's all irrelevant because The Crew 1, which is its own separate game, still got delisted, got removed from existence, and purchases that players made of The Crew got removed from their libraries. They essentially got stolen from them. He talks about how to preserve games or release version 2 and version 3 of these titles, but version 2 and version 3 are not patched versions of an existing game. They're entirely new games. The old games also are their own separate products, and you're taking those away from players. Releasing sequels doesn't invalidate what you're doing. So yeah, again, incredibly lame and desperate attempts to discredit Stop Killing Games. And here comes one more in the form of an anonymous complaint that was issued against Ross Scott to the European Union in regards to the Stop Killing Games movement, as detailed here by Ross Scott himself on his channel, Accursed Farms. This video is titled, "The Industry Filed false claims against the Stop Killing Games initiative. So he is referring to this transparency complaint right here that basically tries to claim that Ross Scott did not disclose certain information that he had to disclose per regulation in regards to European Citizens Initiative. But as I'll explain soon, this is just incredibly bad faith argument, similar to what Video Games Europe and Ubisoft put out as far as statements in regards to Stop Killing Games is concerned. Now, it's worth noting that this complaint was issued anonymously, so we have no idea who this is from, but the timing of everything is certainly interesting. Video Games Europe recently came out with a statement. Ubisoft came out with a statement. The games industry as a whole is realizing that Stop Killing Games has gained enough momentum that it will likely be in the hands of legislators. And so the timing of this anonymous complaint coming in, the timing is certainly interesting. So the legal basis for complaint is Article 17 of Regulation EU 2019/788, which requires European Citizens Initiative organizers to provide clear, accurate, and comprehensive information on the sources of funding for the initiative exceeding €500 per sponsor. The regulation specifically states the group of organizers shall provide for the publication in the register and, where appropriate, on its campaign website, clear, accurate, and comprehensive information on the sources of funding for the initiative exceeding €500 per sponsor. And then they highlight how Article 17.2 grants anyone the right to submit a complaint in regards to the violation of this regulation. So what this complaint is claiming is that Ross Scott made financial contributions to this initiative and did not disclose that, and therefore he's in violation of European Citizens Initiative regulations. Or here's how they put it in this current violation section of this complaint. Number 1, false no funding declaration. The official European Citizens Initiative register currently displays no content available under sources of funding, indicating the organizers have declared 0 funding sources. And number 2, systematic concealment of major contribution. This declaration appears fundamentally incorrect based on publicly documented evidence of substantial undisclosed professional contributions to the campaign. So this complaint tries to claim that Ross Scott did help fund the campaign on some level, and the way they frame it is professional contributions. They make the assumption that he's essentially like a professional campaign manager because he's come out with statements like this one from July of 2025 via an interview with News Outlet PC Gamer, where he said, "There have been many weeks on the campaign where I've been working 12 to 14 hours a day to keep things moving to get signatures." Now, working doesn't necessarily mean on a professional level. Ross Scott has been working on a purely volunteer basis, but that's something that this complaint doesn't take into consideration. They also highlight how Scott once admitted that I've been running a rickshaw carrying people to the destination. So yeah, they're interpreting this rather literally when it's just metaphorical hyperbole. And then beyond that, they say here multiple media interviews identified Scott as handling the standard day-to-day work of running the Stop Killing Games initiative. And then last but not least, they try to claim that Scott is described as the primary strategic decision maker and public spokesperson throughout the campaign. Now, before we delve into this next section, where they essentially come up with a bunch of numbers to try to claim that Ross Scott's contribution into Stop Killing Games is akin to monetary contribution for this European Citizens Initiative that is essentially trying to stop the destruction of video games, I'd like to highlight a very important point that this complaint missed. Ross Scott, while he's spearheading Stop Killing Games, that is not the same as the actual initiative. Stop Killing Games is a website that essentially promotes and informs people about the actual European Citizens Initiative that goes by the name Stop Destroying Video Games, which Ross Scott did not organize or spearhead because Ross Scott isn't even European, so he cannot be among those who organized this. In fact, if you go to the actual official initiative of Stop Destroying Video Games, you'll find the following organizers under the categories of representative, substitute, members, and others, and Ross Scott is not listed here at all because he legally cannot become an organizer of this European initiative. There's a distinction between Stop Killing Games, the website, and Stop Destroying Video Games, the actual initiative. Stop Killing Games merely tries to inform people about the official initiative, but the actual initiative itself, Stop Destroying Video Games, Ross Scott, aside from his support of it, it has nothing to do with Ross Scott at all. So the fact that they're going after Ross Scott as if he's the head honcho of Stop Destroying Video Games, the official movement, is just wild and already woefully misinformed. But then here comes the huge logic leap where they try to assess Ross Scott's professional value and how his contributions towards the campaign can be seen as monetary value that was not reported. This complaint cites how Ross Scott has himself said that he spent 12 to 14 hours per day throughout many weeks during critical campaign phases. And then they provide some kind of conservative estimate, like they just made up these numbers. 15 to 20 weeks at high intensity at 12 to 14 hours a day. That's roughly 1,260 hours to 1,960 hours. Ross Scott himself was baffled by this because they just came up with these numbers without actually consulting with Ross Scott. There are days in which Ross Scott does work 12 to 14 hours a day, and there are some weeks where it's more intense than others, but making up these numbers without actually understanding Ross Scott's schedule and his involvement in the campaign and how much time, per day, per week, per month he actually spends on the campaign, and issuing this complaint as if they have hard evidence when this is just speculative is wild. And then beyond that, they assume that there's just additional ongoing daily campaign management throughout the 12 plus month period, which adds additional hours on top of these. And then they come up with this professional rate. If you are a campaign management professional or an advocacy services provider, the market rate they cite is between 50 to 75 euros per hour. And so they say that the minimum estimated value that Ross Scott contributed is between 63,000 euros and 147,000 euros in professional contribution. What they're saying is that while Ross Scott didn't directly fund the campaign by directly giving it money, he did technically make professional contributions, and they assume the value of his quote-unquote professional contributions as follows. They just assume that Ross Scott is working for free on a professional capacity, and working for free counts as giving money towards the campaign because that's money that's not being paid to him because he's providing those services as a professional for free, when all Ross Scott has been doing is just volunteering his time. But they argue in bad faith that that volunteer time is actually professional contributions that are worth this much money based on the current market rate when it comes to campaign management and advocacy services. But Ross Scott is not a professional campaign manager or doesn't provide professional advocacy services. He just strongly believes in the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative and therefore founded the Stop Killing Games website because he strongly believes that he needs to raise awareness of an issue that he believes in and that clearly a lot of people also believe in based on the sheer number of signatures that this campaign got. And then they further try to argue in bad faith by saying that what they've presented here represents only documented intensive periods, not total campaign involvement, which they have no evidence of, no actual information about. They clearly did no research, or they clearly didn't even reach out to Ross Scott to confirm any of this. They're just making assumptions. It also says right here that Scott has managed strategic decisions, media relations, and operational leadership throughout. Those are all just false claims and, again, bad faith assumptions. He's done a lot for the movement, but purely on a volunteer basis, in the same way that, when I put out a video about Stop Killing Games, I don't do it to, as a professional directly trying to contribute to the campaign. I'm not trying to be a sponsor for the campaign. I just believe that this campaign, this Stop Destroying Video Games initiative, has some good points and should be something that legislators should take a look at, and that's the only reason why I'm making content about it. That doesn't suddenly make me a professional or someone who's making strategic decisions or someone who's handling media relations and operational leadership. Again, just made up bullshit. And then they say that even conservative calculations show contributions exceeding 500 euros threshold by 125 to 295 times, based on the assumption that Ross Scott's volunteer work can somehow be translated into monetary value because of the assumed professional aspect of his contributions, rather than seeing it as just volunteer work. Ross Scott's only sin here was just working really hard. And in doing so, they're like, look how hard he worked, and look at how much money that could translate to if he were a campaign manager or whatever. But he isn't. He's not working in that capacity. So you can't just make that assumption and try to make these bullshit claims. Like that's as good as libel. And so based on all these false assumptions, they kind of point out these violations. They even highlight how Ross Scott is American. And so they say that his undisclosed contribution is a foreign source completely hidden from the European Union citizen evaluation of the initiative's backing and independence. But there was no actual financial contribution from a foreign source. This was just a foreign source volunteering their hours to bring light to this cause, to bring light to the Stop Destroying Video Games official European Citizens Initiative through the Stop Killing Games website, but that doesn't count as financial contribution. The logic leap here is actually insane. The fact that they're saying that this all constitutes as misrepresenting the initiative as having no financial backing while substantially depending on foreign professional contributions is just a wild statement. The amount of speculation that they extrapolated from just a few words that Ross Scott spoke, whether it's in interviews or by himself in his YouTube videos, and the way they try to cite how multiple media articles consistently identify Scott as campaign leader and primary spokesperson, when A, media outlets can be wrong, and B, him being the leader of Stop Killing Games doesn't mean he's the leader of the official Stop Destroying Video Games initiative. The fact that there's so much misinformation here just highlights the level of bad faith argument that the games industry as a whole is trying to engage in to stop this, because they are afraid that when this passes, it will end up inconveniencing them. Game companies love to exert control. They just prefer to have their options open because they will always take the easier route, whereas with legislations, they are forced to do certain things that protect consumers that they may not want to do because it's too inconvenient or because it costs a little money. But yeah, their main claim is that professional time investment constitutes quantifiable in-kind contribution under transparency regulations. They keep assuming that Ross Scott is contributing professional time that is, worth some kind of money if you look at market rates. Just complete, utter nonsense. Complete fiction. And the worst part about this complaint is that if you go to the official European Citizens Initiative website and look at the FAQ, which answers questions like who is considered a sponsor, it spells it out right here that Ross Scott's actions were completely above board. It says right here, sponsors are people or organizations providing financial support over 500 euros, which Ross Scott did not do. He did not contribute any sort of money. Then it says right here that legal persons or organizations providing other economically quantifiable in-kind donations or non-economically quantifiable support to an initiative are also considered sponsors. But Ross Scott is not a legal person or organization. He's purely just a volunteer, which brings us to the last point. Individuals providing non-financial support, such as volunteering, are not considered sponsors under the ECI regulation and do not need to be reported. Ding, ding, ding. This is the category that Ross Scott falls under. And then beyond that, Ross Scott made triple sure that the way he was supporting the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative was all above board. He says so right here in his video where he spoke to folks within the European Citizens Initiative to ensure that he was not overstepping in any way, shape, or form. Here's what he had to say on that front.
There's something I didn't tell you. The official organizers literally asked EU representatives if it was okay for me to assist them in the capacity I have been back in spring of 2024. Just to make sure everything was above board in case there was a problem or we needed to report anything. They said what I've been doing is fine. We've been doing this by the book, guys.
So yeah, the complaint is just a whole lot of nothing. It is such a desperate attempt to try to kill Stop Killing Games or the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative. And they're doing so through means that clearly highlight that they are just shooting darts in the dark in the hopes that it hits something. Except there is no target because the Stop Killing Games movement and the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative have all been above board, and they're reasonable asks that has garnered a lot of support. And so companies who are scared or entities who disagree with this because of their own agendas are just trying any means possible to see if they can delay or stop this thing that currently looks to be unstoppable. And it looks like it will ultimately be in the hands of legislators. And when legislators hear what are very sound arguments that, products that you buy, you should be able to have agency over as a customer, it's likely a losing battle for game companies and the pundits who support the destruction of video games and companies' ability to just strip games, digital or physical or otherwise, from players' libraries or from players and customers in general. In fact, already we're seeing members of the European Parliament expressing support for the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative, as highlighted here by Ross Scott, who listed out some pretty prominent names, legislators across all of Europe who do agree with Stop Killing Games and the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative. In fact, Nicolae here in particular from Romania is a vice president of the European Parliament, and he has expressed his full support for Stop Killing Games, and he himself has signed the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative, and he said the following quote, "A game once sold belongs to the customer, not the company." I mean, boom, mic drop right there. Simple statement, but apparently one that needs to be repeated. And this post right here from the Exerto that talked about this garnered millions of views, tens of thousands of likes, and tons of people essentially calling this legislator a Chad for agreeing what is essentially a very basic consumer right, a very reasonable consumer right where customers' access to products that they purchased should not be controlled by any other entity but the customer. It's theirs. They paid money for it. In the same way that it'd be invasive if Nintendo came into my house and took away one of my SNES cartridges because the license expired or whatever, how egregious that would be. The same goes for when a digital product gets removed from my library. The only difference being is it feels less invasive because there is no physical entity coming into your house to take that product from you because it's all done digitally through the push of a few buttons, but the effect is ultimately the same. It's equally invasive, but whether it's physical or digital, products are still products. Commerce is still commerce, and it should be treated as such. And what's funny is that even some members of Video Games Europe agree, because apparently when Video Games Europe put out the following statement, this was not something that was done with the vote of every member of Video Games Europe. So for example, right here we have BeamNG, the CTO of this company, put out this statement. BeamNG is a member of Video Games Europe. Video Games Europe didn't ask BeamNG concerning their response to Stop Killing Games. As far as I know, there wasn't a vote on this too. We do not agree with their statement. This is not how a representative group should be behaving. And then he continued with the following statement. If it isn't clear why Video Games Europe's statement is problematic for all companies, their position allows a sale to be fully destroyed at a future time, including right after someone bought it. A lot of EULA say we can just take your products and take them away from you of our own volition at any time for whatever reason. Absolutely ridiculous that such a clause is legal. The statement concludes with, this kind of position destroys consumer trust and leads to consumer protection loss, which is precisely what's happening right now based on the amount of support Stop Destroying Video Games has gotten. Hopefully legislators will take this seriously. Even Epic Games' own Tim Sweeney came out when people pointed out this list of logos of companies who are under Video Games Europe or who are members of Video Games Europe. Tim Sweeney came out to clarify that Epic Games hasn't lobbied or opined on the law. I guess our logo is on the picture above because we're a member of various trade organizations like Video Games Europe, and some of them have lobbied or opined against the proposal. But that doesn't mean that the companies who are members of that organization actually approved this statement. So Video Games Europe represented everyone with the statement that, a lot of these companies may not necessarily agree with. So even within the games industry, there might not be full-fledged support for the eradication of Stop Killing Games. Some companies may actually want Stop Killing Games to go through and may actually agree with the preservation of video games, that being a mandate, a legal mandate, so that executives can't just get lazy about that stuff. And the mandate of protecting consumers' purchases. That's just reasonable. And so yeah, the good thing about all this is that a lot of positive movement and momentum has transpired. But Ross Scott has also expressed that if we're seeing complaints like these right now, when the Stop Killing Games or the Stop Destroying Video Games initiative has garnered more than enough signatures for it to become something that legislators take a look at, he is afraid of becoming a target, essentially. He already is a target. And, this one shot that was taken at him was just incredibly lame. And this complaint has no legs to stand on, but, who knows what other attempts will be made. So I hope Ross Scott knows that, if they try some shit, the internet is coming for the entities, because Ross Scott, he has a lot of backing and he made this movement possible. And now something really good might happen for consumers because of his efforts. So know that you do have a lot of backing, a lot of support, and a lot of people will speak on your behalf so long as everything continues to be above board, which has been thus far. So I wish you the best, but I also wish this movement and initiative the best. I hope that legislators get the right message and do the right thing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the latest update on Stop Killing Games / Stop Destroying Video Games, the official European Citizens Initiative. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the current state of Stop Killing Games and the complaint that was officially filed with the European Union against it. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.